Hello friends, welcome back to another episode of Reddit NuclearRevenge. I've got two stories in this one. The first is about an older brother going to extreme measures to get back at a shady dealer and to protect his brother. And the second story is a really entertaining story of how a grandmother comes to the defense of her granddaughter, and it results in a toe being bitten off. I hope you stay for these two stories today and subscribe for future videos. This story is titled, "So You're Gonna Hurt My Brother? Not a Good Idea." Background: I'm an ex-druggie from a town that has a pretty bad gang population. I have two little half-brothers who live a town over. My little brothers are the complete opposite of me. They get good grades, and are in sports, and are very popular. We didn't get along very well back then, but I would have died for them. I love my bros. When I was 16, I had, and still have to this day, two good friends that were from the city that my brothers were from, and all they did was smoke up. Well, one night, they purchased a rather large amount of pot from a new guy in town. Let's call him Shady Dealer, or SD. That night, when my friends were walking home from SD's house, a group of dudes rolled up on them, jumped them, and took everything they had, and one of my friends lost eyesight in his left eye. There was nothing I could do at that point, and had no proof that it was Shady Dealer who set them up, so nothing was done. It's now 1 year later, and I've been bare-knuckle boxing for the last 3 years with a very well-known Mexican gang, in order to fund my habit of harder drugs. I've kept a close eye on Shady Dealer. I hear that he's planning a robbery very similar to what happened to my friends a year prior, only this time, the mark is my little brother and his best friend. The setup was on a Friday night, and I found out on Thursday. And now, for the revenge. I've been keeping track of this guy. I know everything about his shitty home life. I know his dad's a construction worker, and is gone at 4 a.m., and his mom is out of the picture, and that's it. Nobody else lives at home. So at 4:15 a.m., I jumped into his backyard, put on my balaclava, brass knuckles, and took a blade, and walked right into the back door of his room. Gave him some beats, took everything of value that he had, and I left him zip-tied to his toilet. The aftermath is, I heard he had over 6 broken bones, and after he got out of the hospital, his dad kicked him out. I'm not entirely sure why, but he may have not liked that the house has become a target for danger, so he ended up homeless, and now he's in prison for armed robbery. Surprise, surprise, so yeah, don't even think about hurting my family. This story's titled, Granny Gator and the Toe Incident. Okay, let me preface this story by stating the fact that I'm well aware that it sounds absolutely batshit insane. I also don't really condone the behavior displayed therein, including my own. My family is a dumpster fire that gives trailer trash a bad name, and unfortunately, every word herein is true to the best of my recollection because it happened about 25 years ago. My grandmother started having children young. She married at 13 and had my father when she was 14, so she wasn't quite as old as my other grandmothers by the time I was born. She had full custody of me from the day I was born. I never went home from the hospital with my parents, which meant that Gigi was the only mother I ever had. My father and mother didn't want to raise me because they were too busy getting high to give a shit about their baby, so they just gave me to her and bounced, which is why she had me to start with. My grandmother has been dead 10 years now, and I still have nightmares about her, so that's a fair indication of the type of person she was. She was vicious, mentally manipulative, and had a temper like a powder keg. One tiny spark and it was on like Donkey Kong 100% of the time. She was also super possessive of me to a degree that was a little terrifying. It bordered on obsession and it was not healthy. However, it meant that when something happened to me, she had no chill at all. She could go from 0 to psycho in about 0.3 seconds, and it was at times a little bit awe-inspiring when it wasn't directed at me. It was a bit hypocritical though, since she was basically berating the fuck out of me herself on a daily basis, but apparently in her mind, she was the only person allowed to treat me like shit. There was a particularly aggressive bully that lived near my house. He hated me, I hated him, and it was a consistently escalating problem. I was almost never allowed to go outside as a child, so when he bullied me, it was always at school, and the staff turned a blind eye to it more often than not. Well, one day I came home from school, 5th grade by the way, with a fat lip and a giant bruise on my face. My bully had managed to catch me between classes and had taken the opportunity to beat the shit out of me where nobody could see or report him for doing it. My grandmother snapped. She took me by the hand and we walked to the bully's house, and I stood in the driveway watching her knock on the door. I was petrified at the time because I knew the mood she was in, and I was also scared of the bully and his mom. I was a giant ball of vaguely human-shaped anxiety, and for good reason. Bully's mom, from here on, BM, opened her door and looked at my grandmother, and the conversation went essentially as follows. It's been a long time, so I can't entirely remember everything that was said. The mom said, "What?" My grandmother replied, "Your son put his hands on my little girl." And this bitch didn't even try to deny it. She just lit herself a cigarette and blew the smoke into my grandmother's face, daring her to do something. Now, grandmother wasn't a big lady. She was average sized and about 5'5", so not particularly intimidating physically. BM was a larger woman, about grandmother's height but much heavier, outweighing grandma by at least 60 pounds. So she was not impressed with grandmother showing up at her door and gave zero fuck about her son's behavior or Gigi's feelings about it. This was a mistake because about half a second later, after BM blew the smoke into my grandmother's face, she didn't give her a single sound of warning before she snatched BM up by the hair, dragged her out of her damn house by it onto her front porch, and then promptly threw her off face first. It was a trailer porch, so it was actually a pretty decent drop too because the trailer was set up higher than normal. For my part, I was absolutely certain that BM was gonna die at the time. As I said, grandmother had issues, and that meant that when she snapped, and when that happened, she was capable of almost anything. BM took the fall like a trooper though, and came up swinging. She managed to clip Gigi's cheek before Gigi managed to get a good hold on her hair again, and used it to fling her onto the ground again. Grandmother caught her a few more times before she managed to pull her down with her. The two of them were rolling around the dirt like a pair of angry dogs, snarling and swearing and biting and clawing at each other. It got ugly, so very ugly. BM was a tough cookie though, I'll give her that. She was giving as good as she got for a hot minute, but she wasn't ready for what grandmother was capable of. They wrestled on the ground for a while, but grandmother finally got BM on her back and started feeding her knuckle sandwich after knuckle sandwich while sitting on her chest. Then, BM made the terrible mistake. She tried to use one of her legs to hook my grandmother and either flip her off or kick her in the face. I'm not sure which it was really, but the end result was that her bare foot was way too close to grandmother's mouth. Grandmother's response was to turn her head and bite one of the toes clean right off at the joint and spit it back into BM's face. I'll never forget the look on BM's face when it happened. It was a combination of horror and what the fuck, rapidly followed by pain because she started howling like a scalded cat, and the whole time my grandmother was still fucking her up. Only now, BM wasn't trying to fight. She was just trying to get away because she finally realized that grandmother was crazy and absolutely capable of destroying her with a smile on her face and a song in her heart. Someone had called the cops, and it was at this point that the cops showed up and separated the two of them, and they had to pry Gigi's hands from around BM's throat to do it. BM was out cold by that point and purple, so one officer put my grandmother in the squad car, with me beside her, while the other called an ambulance for BM and looked for her toe. Then came the explanations, and most people would have been fucked by that point. They really would, but grandmother was without question the best actress I've ever seen. If she'd used that skill in movies or theater, she would have won an Oscar without a doubt. It was extraordinary. She could rewrite whole events, and even if you knew she was lying, she'd end up having you believing her version and questioning your own memory and sanity. To this day, I have no clue how she did it. The story she spun for the cops was one of her greatest works of fiction, and this is how it went. Grandmother claimed that I had come home from school after being beaten, and that she'd wanted to speak with BM about his behavior and try to work out something to correct the problem between our families in a responsible way. But when she knocked on the door and BM answered, BM was hostile from the beginning and eventually became physically aggressive when my grandmother said that she either wanted to deal with her son or Gigi would be informing the authorities immediately. Then came the big performance, and what a performance it was. Tears started to trickle down grandmother's face, and she used her most quivery old lady voice to say that she and I had turned to go, but that BM pushed me off the porch, and after I hit the ground, she tried to do the same with grandmother. But then grandmother had grabbed her out of reflex, and she went down, and they ended up falling together, with grandmother on top. Grandmother then claimed that the bruise that I had on my face came from the fall, not the previous altercation, and that once they were both on the ground, grandmother had just lost it. That woman had just put her hands on her child, and she was so scared that if BM kept going, she would hurt me really badly. She told the officer all of this while crying quietly. Not big sobs, nothing showy, just silent tears sliding down her face, and that tiny quivering old woman voice as she apologized for her actions because she was just so scared. Then the officer looked at me and said, "Is this what happened?" And while I'd like to say that I told the truth, and that I did the right thing and was honest with the officer about what happened, I can't because that would be a lie. I absolutely did not do any of those things. Instead, I looked at grandmother and let the fear and the stress of the situation just rise up and swallow me. And then, I used that emotion to promptly burst into tears myself. I didn't really talk, just nodded my head and cried, and clung to grandmother, who stroked my hair and rocked me back and forth, while I was trying my best not to look the officer in the eyes. I knew that I was nowhere near a good enough liar to pull it off if he was looking dead at me, so I hid my face against grandmother's shirt, and did my best to seem traumatized. He bought it, hook, line, and sinker. BM ended up being arrested for assault, disturbing the peace, and possession of an illegal substance because when they searched her, they found a small baggie of pot in her bra. BM also ended up being responsible for my grandmother's hospital bill for the sprained wrist that she ended up with from pounding on BM's face like a meat bongo. The toe never got reattached, and BM ultimately ended up losing her job and going to actual jail for 4 months, and was on probation for like 3 years after. My grandmother didn't catch a single charge from that day's events, and BM's family eventually moved from the trailer park, and I never saw any of them again afterwards. The moral of this story: never fuck with old trailer trash ladies. You might lose a toe. Hey friends, I hope you enjoyed these 2 nuclear revenge stories. Let me know in the comments below if you think these 2 stories deserve the Nuclear Revenge badge. If you aren't subscribed, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. See you guys in the next one.